3 months after Lady Victoria's departure, Princess Charlotte stood in the same study room where Captain Morrison had first overheard her being emotionally abused. The space had been completely redecorated, the heavy burgundy curtains replaced with cheerful yellow fabric that filled the room with warm, natural light. The imposing mahogany desk where Lady Victoria had conducted her harsh lessons had been replaced with a comfortable reading nook surrounded by bookcases filled with age-appropriate literature and educational materials. Charlotte's new tutor, Miss Emma Richardson, was everything Lady Victoria had pretended to be during her interviews. A former primary school teacher with additional training in child psychology, Miss Richardson had been personally recommended by Dr. Crawford and had undergone extensive background checks that went far beyond the standard protocols previously used by the palace. The difference in Charlotte's demeanor was remarkable. Where she had once sat rigidly upright, afraid to move or speak unless directly addressed, she now sprawled comfortably in a beanbag chair, enthusiastically discussing a book about marine biology she had discovered in the palace library. Her natural curiosity had returned gradually, emerging like flowers after a long winter. "Miss Emma, did you know that octopi have 3 hearts?" Charlotte asked, her eyes bright with the kind of wonder that Lady Victoria had systematically tried to eliminate. "And they can change colors to match their surroundings, which is called camouflage." Miss Richardson smiled, genuinely delighted by Charlotte's enthusiasm rather than viewing it as something to be controlled or redirected. "That's fascinating, Charlotte. What do you think would happen if humans could change colors like octopi? How might that change the way we interact with each other?" The question was designed to encourage creative thinking and speculation, the exact opposite of Lady Victoria's rigid approach that had demanded precise, memorized answers to predetermined questions. Charlotte considered the question seriously, her face lighting up as her imagination engaged with the possibilities. Well, if people could change colors, maybe they wouldn't judge each other by how they looked on the outside. They might have to get to know each other's personalities instead of making assumptions based on appearance. "That's a very thoughtful observation," Miss Richardson replied. "You've connected a scientific concept to social psychology in a way that shows both creativity and empathy. Would you like to explore that idea further through some research, or would you prefer to learn more about marine biology first?" The simple act of giving Charlotte choices in her learning had been revolutionary after months of rigid structure and predetermined curricula. Lady Victoria had believed that children should accept instruction without question or input, viewing any expression of preference as defiance that needed to be corrected. Miss Richardson understood that engagement and enthusiasm were essential components of effective learning, especially for intelligent children like Charlotte who thrived when given opportunities to explore their interests. Morrison watched these interactions from his position near the door, officially maintaining security, but actually serving as an additional layer of emotional protection for Charlotte. His presence had become a source of comfort for her, a reminder that there were adults in her life who prioritized her well-being above all other considerations. The psychological healing process had not been simple or quick. Dr. Crawford continued to work with Charlotte twice weekly, helping her process the confusion and self-doubt that Lady Victoria's methods had created. There had been difficult sessions when Charlotte struggled to trust her own perceptions or express opinions without fear of correction or punishment. "Sometimes I still worry that I'm being too loud or asking too many questions," Charlotte had confided to Dr. Crawford during one particularly emotional session. Lady Victoria always said that proper princesses were seen and not heard, and that my curiosity was a sign of poor breeding and inadequate self-control. Dr. Crawford had worked patiently to help Charlotte understand that Lady Victoria's teachings were not only wrong, but deliberately designed to damage her confidence. "Charlotte, curiosity is one of the most valuable qualities a person can possess. It leads to learning, discovery, and understanding. Anyone who tries to eliminate your natural curiosity is trying to limit your potential, not help you reach it." Prince William and Catherine had been actively involved in Charlotte's recovery, making significant changes to their own schedules to spend more time with her and rebuild the trust that Lady Victoria's manipulation had damaged. They had implemented new protocols for all staff members who worked with their children, including mandatory training on recognizing signs of emotional abuse and clear guidelines for reporting concerns. The couple had also made the difficult decision to share Charlotte's experience with Prince George and Prince Louis in age-appropriate terms, helping them understand why their sister had seemed sad and withdrawn for several months, and ensuring they knew how to seek help if they ever felt uncomfortable with any adult's behavior. George, at 10 years old, had been particularly affected by learning that his sister had been mistreated while he remained unaware. "I should have noticed that Charlotte wasn't acting like herself," he had told his parents during a family discussion about the situation. Catherine had gently explained that recognizing emotional abuse was difficult even for adults, and that it was not his responsibility to protect Charlotte from the adults who were supposed to be caring for her. "George, the most important thing you can do for your siblings is exactly what you're already doing, being kind and supportive and letting us know if anyone ever makes them feel scared or uncomfortable." The family dynamics had been strengthened by the crisis, with all three children developing a deeper understanding of the importance of open communication and mutual support. Charlotte's experience had served as a painful but valuable lesson about the need for vigilance and the courage required to speak up when something felt wrong. Morrison's role in Charlotte's life had evolved significantly since the confrontation with Lady Victoria. While he maintained his professional duties as her protection officer, he had also become a trusted confidant and mentor. Charlotte felt comfortable approaching him with questions or concerns, knowing that he would listen without judgment and take action if necessary to protect her welfare. Their relationship had deepened through regular conversations about courage, integrity, and the responsibility that came with positions of authority and privilege. Morrison drew on his military experience to help Charlotte understand that true strength came from protecting those who were vulnerable, not from dominating or controlling them. "Being a princess isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes," Morrison explained during one of their garden walks. "It's about using your position to help others and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or scary." Charlotte had internalized these lessons in ways that would have been impossible under Lady Victoria's regime of fear and control. She began to demonstrate the kind of moral courage that would serve her well throughout her life, speaking up when she witnessed unfairness and showing compassion for others who might be struggling. The most significant test of Charlotte's recovery came 6 months after Lady Victoria's departure, when the family attended a charity gala where Charlotte was expected to interact with numerous adult strangers and speak briefly about a cause she had chosen to support. Under Lady Victoria's influence, such events had been sources of extreme anxiety, with Charlotte terrified of making mistakes that might embarrass her family or reflect poorly on the monarchy. Morrison watched carefully as Charlotte prepared for the event, noting how different her approach had become. Instead of rigid memorization of approved responses, she had worked with Miss Richardson to understand the charity's mission and develop her own thoughts about why the cause mattered to her personally. "I'm a little nervous about talking to so many people," Charlotte admitted to Morrison as they traveled to the venue. "But Miss Emma says that being nervous is normal and that it shows I care about doing well." "Miss Emma is absolutely right," Morrison replied. "Some of the bravest people I've served with were nervous before important missions, but they used that nervous energy to stay focused and alert. Feeling nervous doesn't mean you're not ready. It means you understand the importance of what you're doing." At the gala, Charlotte's performance exceeded everyone's expectations. She spoke confidently about her chosen charity, answered questions from reporters with thoughtfulness and sincerity, and interacted with other guests with the kind of natural warmth and curiosity that Lady Victoria had tried so hard to suppress. Prince William and Catherine watched their daughter with obvious pride and relief, seeing clear evidence that she had not only recovered from her traumatic experience, but had emerged stronger and more resilient than before. The confidence she displayed was genuine rather than the brittle facade that Lady Victoria had tried to create through intimidation and control. During her brief speech about environmental conservation, Charlotte demonstrated the kind of authentic passion and personal conviction that would serve her well throughout her royal duties. "I've learned that protecting our planet isn't just about following rules or doing what we're supposed to do," she said, her voice clear and confident. "It's about caring enough about the future to make difficult choices today, even when those choices require courage and sacrifice. Morrison recognized the deeper meaning in her words, understanding that Charlotte was speaking not just about environmental issues, but about the broader lessons she had learned through her ordeal with Lady Victoria. She had developed an understanding of moral courage that would guide her decision-making throughout her life. The evening was a complete success, with Charlotte receiving praise from attendees for her poise, intelligence, and genuine engagement with the cause she was supporting. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could handle challenging situations with confidence and grace, using her own judgment and natural abilities rather than relying on rigid scripts or fear-based compliance. As they returned to the palace that night, Charlotte reflected on how much had changed in her life over the past several months. Captain Morrison, do you think Lady Victoria was right about anything she taught me? Morrison considered the question carefully, understanding that Charlotte was still processing her experience and trying to integrate the positive and negative aspects of her education. Charlotte, even people who use harmful methods sometimes include elements of truth in their teaching. Lady Victoria was right that your position carries responsibilities and that people will have high expectations for your behavior. But she was completely wrong about how to prepare you for those responsibilities. What do you mean? She tried to prepare you by breaking down your confidence and replacing it with fear. But real preparation comes from building your confidence, helping you understand your own strengths and values, and teaching you to trust your own judgment. Fear makes people weak and dependent. Confidence makes them strong and capable. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand. Lady Victoria wanted me to need her approval for everything, but Miss Emma and Dr. Crawford want me to learn how to make good decisions on my own. Exactly. The goal of any good teacher or mentor is to help their students become independent and capable, not to create dependence and insecurity. As they reached Charlotte's rooms, she turned to Morrison with a maturity that belied her 8 years. Captain Morrison, if you ever notice that someone is treating me badly again, will you speak up right away instead of waiting to gather evidence? Morrison felt a pang of regret for the months he had spent documenting Lady Victoria's behavior before taking action. While his caution had been professionally appropriate, it had prolonged Charlotte's suffering unnecessarily. Charlotte, I promise you that if I ever have any concern about how someone is treating you, I will address it immediately. Your safety and well-being are more important than protocol or procedures. Good, Charlotte replied with a small smile. And I promise that if anyone ever makes me feel scared or confused like Lady Victoria did, I'll tell you right away instead of trying to handle it by myself. This mutual commitment represented the most important outcome of their shared experience. Charlotte had learned to trust her own perceptions and to seek help when needed, while Morrison had learned that protecting her welfare sometimes required challenging authority structures and risking personal consequences. The changes implemented in the aftermath of Lady Victoria's departure extended far beyond Charlotte's individual situation. Prince William and Catherine had used the experience to review and strengthen all protocols related to staff selection, supervision, and evaluation. New training programs were developed for all household employees, emphasizing the importance of child welfare and the procedures for reporting concerns about potential abuse or misconduct. Dr. Crawford had been retained as a permanent consultant to the household, available to work with any of the children who might need psychological support and to provide ongoing training for staff members about child development and appropriate behavioral expectations. Miss Richardson's success with Charlotte had led to her promotion to head of educational services for all 3 royal children, with authority to develop individualized curricula that honored each child's unique interests and learning style, while ensuring they received the preparation necessary for their future roles. Perhaps most importantly, the experience had strengthened the royal family's commitment to prioritizing their children's emotional health and personal development above all other considerations. While the children would always face unique challenges and responsibilities because of their positions, their parents were determined to ensure they grew up with strong self-esteem, clear values, and the confidence to navigate those challenges successfully. 1 year after Lady Victoria's departure, Charlotte had not only fully recovered from her traumatic experience, but had developed qualities of resilience, empathy, and moral courage that would serve her throughout her life. She had learned that speaking up against injustice required bravery, but was essential for protecting herself and others from harm. Morrison continued to serve as her protection officer, but their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than a standard professional arrangement. He had become a mentor and role model, demonstrating through his own actions the kind of integrity and courage that Charlotte would need to develop as she grew into her royal responsibilities. The study room where Charlotte had once sat in fearful silence was now filled with laughter and animated discussion as she explored topics that captured her imagination and developed her own thoughts and opinions. The transformation was complete, but the lessons learned would last a lifetime. The Monday morning meeting with Prince William took place in his private study, a room lined with military memorabilia and photographs from his service years. Morrison had requested absolute privacy, and the prince had cleared his schedule for the entire hour, sensing the gravity of the situation from Morrison's formal tone during the scheduling call. Prince William listened without interruption as Morrison presented his carefully documented observations and Charlotte's own testimony from the previous evening. The future king's expression grew increasingly grave as the full scope of Lady Victoria's psychological manipulation became clear. His hands clenched and unclenched on the mahogany desk surface, the only outward sign of the fury building beneath his composed exterior. "How long has this been going on?" Prince William asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "I believe it started almost immediately after Lady Victoria arrived, sir." The changes in Princess Charlotte's behavior were gradual at first, which is consistent with this type of systematic emotional abuse. The perpetrator establishes trust and authority before beginning to exert control and manipulation. Prince William stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where Charlotte often played. "I chose Lady Victoria myself. Her credentials were impeccable, her references glowing. How did we miss this?" Morrison had anticipated this question and had prepared his response carefully. "Sir, people like Lady Victoria are experts at presenting themselves in the best possible light while concealing their true nature. She understood exactly what you were looking for in a governess and presented herself accordingly. This is not a failure of your judgment, but evidence of her calculated deception." "Where is Charlotte now?" "With Mrs. Henderson in the morning room, working on a jigsaw puzzle. I thought it would be best to keep her routine as normal as possible until decisions are made about how to proceed." Prince William nodded, his jaw set in determination. "And Lady Victoria?" "She's conducting research in the library for this afternoon's history lesson. She has no idea that her behavior has been discovered. I want her removed from this palace immediately," Prince William said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "But I also want to ensure that Charlotte is protected throughout this process, and that we handle the situation in a way that minimizes additional trauma for her." Morrison had prepared for this conversation extensively and had several recommendations ready. "Sir, I would suggest involving Dr. Sarah Crawford, the child psychologist who worked with Prince George after the media incident last year. Princess Charlotte will need professional support to process what she's experienced and rebuild her confidence." "Agreed. What else?" "Lady Victoria should be confronted privately and given the opportunity to resign quietly. If she refuses or attempts to justify her actions, we may need to involve legal counsel to ensure she cannot seek employment with other families or damage the royal family's reputation through false claims." Prince William turned back to face Morrison, his expression reflecting both gratitude and determination. "James, I need you to know how grateful Catherine and I are that you had the courage to speak up. Charlotte's welfare is more important than any protocol or career consideration. You've protected my daughter in the truest sense of your duty." "Sir, Princess Charlotte showed incredible bravery in speaking to me last night. She was terrified of disappointing you and Princess Catherine, but she trusted me enough to tell the truth. She's a remarkable young lady who deserves better than what she's been experiencing. She'll get better," Prince William promised. "Whatever it takes to help her heal and recover her confidence, we'll provide it. But first, we need to deal with Lady Victoria." The confrontation with Lady Victoria took place 2 hours later in the same study. Prince William had decided to handle the matter personally, with Morrison present as a witness and Catherine joining them after being briefed on the situation. The Princess of Wales had been devastated to learn about Charlotte's suffering, her maternal instincts warring with the shock of discovering how badly they had misjudged Lady Victoria's character. Lady Victoria entered the study with her usual serene confidence, carrying a folder of lesson plans and wearing the kind of professional smile that had initially impressed everyone. Her composure began to crack almost immediately when she saw the three adults waiting for her, their expressions leaving no doubt that this was not a routine educational conference. "Your Royal Highnesses, Captain Morrison," she said, attempting to maintain her usual polished demeanor. "I wasn't expecting a formal meeting this morning. Is there a problem with Princess Charlotte's progress?" Prince William wasted no time on pleasantries. "Lady Victoria, we need to discuss your methods of instruction and discipline regarding our daughter. Specifically, we need you to explain the psychological manipulation, verbal abuse, and physical intimidation that Captain Morrison has documented over the past several months." The color drained from Lady Victoria's face, but she quickly rallied, adopting an expression of shocked innocence. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you're suggesting, sir. I have dedicated myself completely to Princess Charlotte's education and development. Every method I've employed has been designed to prepare her for her future responsibilities as a member of the royal family." Catherine leaned forward, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge of barely controlled anger. "We're not talking about educational methods, Lady Victoria. We're talking about systematically destroying our daughter's confidence, isolating her from her support system, and using fear as a tool to control her behavior. Your Royal Highness, with respect, Princess Charlotte is a sensitive child who requires firm guidance. The standards expected of royal children are necessarily higher than those applied to ordinary children. If my methods have seemed strict, it is only because I understand the importance of preparing her properly for her future role." Morrison stepped forward, his military bearing and professional tone lending weight to his words. "Lady Victoria, I have documented instances of you striking Princess Charlotte, verbally berating her for normal childhood behavior, and using psychological intimidation to prevent her from seeking help or speaking to other adults about your treatment of her." Lady Victoria's mask began to slip, revealing glimpses of the cold calculation that Charlotte had experienced daily. "Captain Morrison, you are a security officer, not an educator. You are not qualified to evaluate pedagogical methods or understand the complexities of royal education. If Princess Charlotte has complained about her lessons, it is likely because she is avoiding the hard work necessary for her development." "No," Prince William interrupted, his voice carrying the full authority of his position and his fury as a protective father. "Charlotte didn't complain. She was too afraid to complain because you had convinced her that speaking up would disappoint her family and prove that she was ungrateful and selfish." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Lady Victoria realized that her usual tactics of deflection and manipulation would not work in this situation. Her carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely, revealing the arrogant sense of entitlement and superiority that had driven her abusive behavior. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," she said, her voice dropping to a lower, more menacing tone. "Charlotte is willful and undisciplined. She lacks the natural intelligence of her brothers and requires intensive correction to reach acceptable standards. I have spent months breaking down her childish defenses and rebuilding her character in a form suitable for her station." Catherine stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You have spent months psychologically abusing our daughter. You have systematically destroyed her self-confidence and natural curiosity, replacing them with fear and self-doubt. What you call rebuilding her character is actually a form of emotional torture." Lady Victoria's expression turned contemptuous. "Your Royal Highness, your emotional attachment to Charlotte prevents you from seeing the necessity of what I've done. You want to raise her as an ordinary child, but she is not ordinary. She will face scrutiny and criticism throughout her life that would crush someone who has not been properly prepared. My methods may seem harsh, but they are creating the psychological resilience she will need to survive in her role. Your methods are creating trauma that could affect her for the rest of her life." Prince William responded. You have violated every principle of child welfare and education, and you have betrayed the trust we placed in you. Morrison watched the exchange carefully, noting how Lady Victoria's responses revealed the depth of her delusions and the calculated nature of her abuse. She genuinely believed that her methods were not only justified but necessary, and she seemed incapable of understanding the damage she had inflicted on Charlotte. I want you to pack your belongings and leave this palace immediately, Prince William continued. You will have no further contact with Princess Charlotte or any member of our family. A non-disclosure agreement will be prepared for your signature, and any attempt to discuss your employment here or make public statements about Princess Charlotte will result in legal action. Lady Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You're making a terrible mistake. Charlotte needs the structure and discipline I provide. Without proper guidance, she will embarrass your family and undermine the monarchy. I am the only person qualified to prepare her for her destiny. Her destiny is to be happy, confident, and emotionally healthy, Catherine said firmly. Everything else is secondary to that fundamental requirement. You will remove her from my care over my objections, Lady Victoria said, her voice rising with desperation and anger. I demand the opportunity to explain my methods to a qualified educational expert who understands the unique requirements of royal education. Prince William's expression hardened further. Lady Victoria, you are no longer employed by this household as of this moment. Captain Morrison will escort you to your quarters to collect your personal belongings, and palace security will ensure your departure within the hour. Lady Victoria stood slowly, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This is a grave error in judgment. Princess Charlotte will suffer without proper guidance. When she fails to meet the expectations placed upon her, when she embarrasses the royal family with her lack of discipline and training, you will remember this conversation and realize your mistake. The only mistake we made was trusting you with our daughter's welfare, Catherine replied. Charlotte will recover from the damage you've done, and she'll grow up to be strong, confident, and capable. But she'll do it without fear, intimidation, or psychological manipulation. Morrison stepped forward to escort Lady Victoria from the room, but she had one final verbal assault to deliver. Princess Charlotte told me herself that she knows she's different from her brothers, that she feels inadequate and fears disappointing her family. I didn't create those insecurities, I simply worked with the reality of her psychology. Without my guidance, those fears will consume her. The cruelty of her words hit their intended target. Catherine visibly recoiled, and Prince William's hands clenched into fists. Morrison realized that Lady Victoria was attempting to plant seeds of doubt and guilt that would continue to cause pain even after her departure. Lady Victoria, Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority earned through years of protecting the royal family. Princess Charlotte's insecurities were created and reinforced by your systematic emotional abuse. Her natural confidence and curiosity were gradually replaced with fear and self-doubt through your deliberate actions. Any child subjected to your methods would develop the psychological symptoms you just described. Prince William regained his composure and delivered his final words to the woman who had tormented his daughter. You will leave now, and you will never again have the opportunity to harm any child in the way you've harmed Charlotte. If I discover that you've sought employment with any other family, I will personally ensure that they are made aware of your methods and their effects. As Morrison escorted Lady Victoria from the study, he could hear her muttering under her breath about ungrateful families and the impossibility of properly educating children whose parents lack the strength to make difficult decisions. Her complete inability to accept responsibility for her actions or acknowledge the harm she had caused confirmed every one of Morrison's suspicions about her psychological makeup. The process of removing Lady Victoria from the palace took exactly 53 minutes. She had maintained detailed records of her progress with Charlotte, including notes about the princess's character deficiencies and the corrective measures needed to address them. Reading through these documents later, Catherine was horrified by the clinical, detached way Lady Victoria had documented her systematic destruction of Charlotte's self-esteem. Once Lady Victoria's departure was complete, the focus shifted to Charlotte's immediate needs and long-term recovery. Dr. Sarah Crawford arrived at the palace that afternoon, bringing with her extensive experience in helping children process trauma and rebuild their confidence after psychological abuse. Charlotte's initial session with Dr. Crawford took place in the palace's most comfortable sitting room, with Catherine present to provide emotional support. The princess was initially reluctant to speak openly, still conditioned by months of Lady Victoria's training to avoid expressing negative emotions or criticizing adult authority figures. Dr. Crawford was patient and skilled, using age-appropriate techniques to help Charlotte understand that her feelings were valid and that speaking about her experiences was both safe and necessary. Gradually, Charlotte began to open up about the fear and confusion she had experienced during Lady Victoria's tenure. "I thought I was stupid because I couldn't remember all the rules," Charlotte confided during the session. Lady Victoria said smart princesses never forgot their lessons, and I was always forgetting something important. Charlotte, Dr. Crawford replied gently, "No 8-year-old child should be expected to remember dozens of complex rules about behavior and conversation. Lady Victoria's expectations were unreasonable and designed to make you feel unsuccessful no matter how hard you tried." Catherine reached over and took Charlotte's hand. "Sweetheart, you are incredibly intelligent and capable. The problems you were having weren't because of anything wrong with you. Lady Victoria was not teaching you properly, and her methods were designed to make you feel confused and inadequate." Over the following days, Charlotte's recovery began slowly but steadily. With Lady Victoria's oppressive presence removed, she began to rediscover her natural curiosity and enthusiasm. The process was not linear, and there were setbacks when old fears and insecurities would surface unexpectedly. Morrison continued his role as Charlotte's protection officer, but their relationship evolved to include a deeper level of trust and communication. Charlotte had learned that he was someone who would listen to her concerns and advocate for her welfare, even when doing so challenged established authority structures. One week after Lady Victoria's departure, Charlotte approached Morrison during their morning walk around the palace gardens. "Captain Morrison, thank you for believing me when I told you what was really happening. I was so scared that everyone would think I was lying or making excuses. Charlotte, you showed incredible bravery by speaking up about something that was frightening and confusing. I'm proud of you for trusting me with the truth, and I want you to know that you can always come to me if anything like that ever happens again." Charlotte nodded solemnly, then surprised Morrison with a question that showed how much she had been thinking about her experiences. "Do you think Lady Victoria was a bad person, or was she just confused about how to teach children properly?" Morrison considered his response carefully, knowing that Charlotte needed to understand the situation in age-appropriate terms while also grasping the seriousness of what had occurred. "I think Lady Victoria had some ideas about education and discipline that were wrong and harmful. Whether that made her a bad person overall, I can't say. But I can say with certainty that her methods were unacceptable and that you deserved much better treatment." Charlotte's recovery would continue for many months, with regular sessions with Dr. Crawford and careful attention from her family and staff to rebuild her confidence and restore her natural emotional equilibrium. The experience had taught everyone involved valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining open communication with children and creating environments where they feel safe to express concerns about their treatment by authority figures. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Captain James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that appearances mattered almost as much as duty itself. The brass buttons gleamed against the deep red fabric, each crease pressed to military perfection. Yet beneath the pristine exterior, his mind churned with growing concern for the young princess he had sworn to protect. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana had always been different from her brothers. At 8 years old, she possessed an intelligence that both impressed and worried those around her. While Prince George maintained his position as heir with the steady confidence expected of a future king, and Prince Louis charmed everyone with his infectious laughter, Charlotte occupied a unique space in the royal hierarchy. She was sharp, observant, and increasingly aware of the complex dynamics that shaped her world. Morrison had been assigned as Charlotte's primary protection officer 3 years earlier, following his distinguished service with Prince William during several overseas tours. The appointment had been both an honor and a challenge. Protecting adult royals required anticipating external threats, managing crowds, and coordinating with local security forces. Protecting a child meant understanding playground politics, school schedules, and the delicate balance between safety and normal childhood experiences. The assignment had become more complicated 6 months ago when Lady Victoria Pemberton joined the household as Charlotte's new governess and companion. Lady Victoria came with impeccable credentials, recommendations from 3 noble families, and a demeanor that impressed everyone during her interviews. She spoke 4 languages fluently, held degrees from Cambridge and the Sorbonne, and demonstrated an encyclopedic knowledge of royal protocol that even seasoned palace staff found impressive. Yet something about Lady Victoria had always unsettled Morrison. Perhaps it was the way her smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she seemed to position herself between Charlotte and everyone else, including her own parents. The woman had a talent for making herself indispensable while gradually isolating those around her from the princess. Morrison's concerns had begun as subtle observations. Charlotte, normally chatty and curious during their walks around the palace grounds, had become quieter and more withdrawn. She no longer asked endless questions about his military service or begged to hear stories about her father's adventures. Instead, she would glance nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear and correct her behavior. The changes were gradual enough that others might dismiss them as normal childhood development. After all, 8-year-old children did go through phases of shyness and introspection. But Morrison had been trained to notice patterns, to identify threats before they fully materialized. His instincts, honed through years of protecting high-value targets in hostile environments, told him that something was fundamentally wrong. Lady Victoria had a way of speaking to Charlotte that sounded nurturing to casual observers, but carried undertones that made Morrison's skin crawl. She would place her hand on the princess's shoulder in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture, but her fingers would press just a little too firmly. Her voice would drop to a whisper when correcting Charlotte's posture or behavior, creating an intimacy that seemed inappropriate for the professional relationship. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November. Morrison had arrived early for his shift, as was his habit, and was conducting his routine security sweep of Charlotte's wing of the palace. The corridors were quiet, with most of the staff not due to arrive for another hour. As he approached the princess's study room, he heard voices from within. Lady Victoria's tone was sharp and cold, stripped of the honeyed sweetness she displayed in front of others. "You will not embarrass me again, Charlotte. Yesterday's behavior at the charity luncheon was completely unacceptable. A princess does not fidget, does not speak unless spoken to, and certainly does not ask inappropriate questions about adult matters." Morrison paused outside the door, his training warring with his protective instincts. Protocol dictated that he should announce his presence and move on. Personal conversations between Charlotte and her governess were not his concern unless they posed an immediate security risk. But the fear in Charlotte's voice when she responded made him freeze in place. "I'm sorry, Lady Victoria. I didn't mean to ask about the money. I just wondered why the children in the pictures looked so sad when we were supposed to be helping them feel better." The sound of Lady Victoria's hand striking Charlotte's arm was sharp and unmistakable. Morrison's blood ran cold. Physical correction of royal children was absolutely forbidden, regardless of the circumstances. Even the late Queen Elizabeth, known for her strict adherence to protocol and discipline, had never raised a hand to any of her grandchildren or great-grandchildren. That is exactly the kind of naive thinking that will embarrass your family and undermine the important work they do, Lady Victoria hissed. "You are not a normal child, Charlotte. You cannot afford to think like one. Every word you speak, every question you ask, every expression on your face will be analyzed and criticized. If you cannot learn to control yourself, perhaps you need more structured guidance." Morrison heard Charlotte's small intake of breath, followed by the rustling of fabric. When Lady Victoria spoke again, her voice had returned to its usual smooth tone, as if the previous exchange had never happened. "Now, let's review your French vocabulary before breakfast. Your pronunciation yesterday was sloppy, and we cannot have you embarrassing yourself in front of the French ambassador next week." The remainder of their lesson proceeded in the formal, measured tones that everyone expected. Morrison completed his security sweep and returned to his post, but his mind remained fixed on what he had witnessed. The incident confirmed his growing suspicions and presented him with a dilemma that kept him awake for the next 3 nights. Royal protection officers operated within strict boundaries. Their primary responsibility was safeguarding their principals from external threats, not intervening in internal family dynamics or educational decisions. Lady Victoria had been selected and approved by Prince William and Catherine personally. Questioning her methods or reporting the incident would require Morrison to challenge the judgment of his future king and queen, potentially ending his career and destroying his reputation. Yet Charlotte's welfare hung in the balance. Morrison had seen enough abuse in his military career to recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and control. Lady Victoria was systematically breaking down Charlotte's natural curiosity and confidence, replacing them with fear and self-doubt. Left unchecked, the damage could affect the princess for the rest of her life. Morrison began documenting everything he observed, creating a detailed log of Lady Victoria's interactions with Charlotte. He noted the times when the governess would isolate the princess from other staff members, the subtle put-downs disguised as constructive criticism, and the way Charlotte's behavior changed in Lady Victoria's presence. The princess, naturally outgoing and confident, would become reserved and anxious whenever her governess appeared. She stopped making eye contact with other staff members and began speaking in a monotone voice that stripped all personality from her words. Most troubling of all, Charlotte had begun to flinch whenever adults approached her unexpectedly, a clear sign that she was anticipating negative consequences for normal childhood behavior. 3 weeks after the study room incident, Morrison's carefully maintained professional distance crumbled completely. He was escorting Charlotte to the palace library for her afternoon reading session when they encountered Lady Victoria in the corridor. The governess had been away for 2 days, attending a conference on childhood education, and Charlotte had slowly begun to return to her normal, animated self in her absence. The moment Charlotte saw Lady Victoria, the transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. The princess's shoulders hunched, her eyes dropped to the floor, and her animated chatter died in her throat. Lady Victoria's smile was radiant as she approached, her arms extended as if greeting a beloved child after a long absence. "Charlotte, darling, I've missed you so much. I hope you've been practicing your deportment while I was away." The words were warm, but Morrison caught the subtle emphasis on practicing, a reminder of expectations and potential consequences. Charlotte nodded silently, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her. Lady Victoria placed her hands on the princess's shoulders, and Morrison saw Charlotte's entire body tense, as if preparing for a blow. "I brought you something from London," Lady Victoria continued, producing a small wrapped package from her handbag. "But gifts are only for princesses who remember their lessons. Tell me, what is the 3rd rule of proper conversation?" Charlotte's voice was barely audible when she responded. "A princess listens more than she speaks, and never asks questions that might make others uncomfortable." "Excellent. And what happens when princesses forget their rules?" The pause stretched for several seconds before Charlotte answered. "Princesses who forget their rules need extra guidance to help them remember." Morrison felt sick. The exchange sounded innocent enough to any casual observer, but he recognized it as a coded threat. Lady Victoria had established a system of control based on fear and psychological manipulation, using the princess's royal status as justification for her methods. That evening, Morrison made his decision. Protocol and career concerns paled in comparison to Charlotte's welfare. He would document everything he had observed and present his findings to Prince William, regardless of the personal consequences. Charlotte needed an advocate, and if that meant ending his own career in royal service, so be it. However, before he could arrange a meeting with Charlotte's father, events took an unexpected turn. Morrison was completing his evening rounds when he heard Charlotte crying in her private sitting room. The sound was muffled, as if she was trying to muffle her sobs with a pillow or blanket. He knocked gently on the door and announced himself. "Your Royal Highness, it's Captain Morrison. Are you all right?" The crying stopped immediately, followed by the sound of Charlotte scrambling to compose herself. When she opened the door, her eyes were red and puffy, but she attempted to smile as if nothing was wrong. "I'm fine, Captain Morrison. Just tired from my lessons today." Morrison knelt down to her level, his formal protocol forgotten in the face of her obvious distress. "Charlotte, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something is bothering you, I'm here to help." For a moment, he saw hope flicker in her eyes. But then, her training kicked in, and she retreated behind the careful mask Lady Victoria had taught her to wear. "Everything is fine. Lady Victoria says princesses don't complain about their education. It's important work, preparing to serve the people." The robotic quality of her response confirmed Morrison's worst fears. Lady Victoria had not only isolated Charlotte from potential sources of help but had also programmed her with responses designed to deflect concern and intervention. Morrison spent the next 2 days crafting his report and gathering evidence to support his observations. He interviewed other staff members carefully, asking indirect questions about Charlotte's behavior and Lady Victoria's methods. The picture that emerged was consistent and disturbing. Multiple people had noticed changes in Charlotte's demeanor, but Lady Victoria's stellar reputation and the deference shown to her position had prevented anyone from speaking up. Mrs. Sarah Henderson, Charlotte's former nanny who still helped with evening routines, confided that the princess had stopped asking for bedtime stories and seemed afraid to express preferences about anything, even simple choices like which pajamas to wear. Thomas Walsh, the underbutler responsible for Charlotte's meals, mentioned that she had become extremely anxious about table manners, sometimes refusing to eat rather than risk making a mistake. Even Charlotte's riding instructor, Colonel Patricia Barnes, had expressed concern about the princess's changed attitude toward her beloved horses. Charlotte had always been a fearless and enthusiastic rider, but recently she had become hesitant and overly focused on Lady Victoria's approval rather than enjoying the experience. Armed with this information, Morrison requested a private meeting with Prince William. The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday, giving him the weekend to finalize his documentation and prepare for what would likely be one of the most difficult conversations of his career. On Sunday evening, as Morrison was reviewing his notes one final time, Charlotte appeared at his office door. She was wearing her nightgown and slippers, having somehow managed to slip away from her evening routine without being noticed. The fact that she had navigated the palace corridors alone would normally have triggered immediate security concerns, but Morrison recognized this as a desperate attempt to reach out for help. Charlotte stood in the doorway for several seconds, wrapping her arms around herself as if for protection. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and frightened in a way that broke Morrison's heart. "Captain Morrison, I need to tell you something important. But Lady Victoria says that princesses who tell tales about their teachers are ungrateful and selfish. She says ungrateful princesses make their families ashamed and disappointed." Morrison set aside his papers and gave Charlotte his full attention. "Charlotte, telling the truth is never selfish, especially when someone is hurting you or making you afraid. Your parents love you very much, and they would never be ashamed of you for being honest about how you're being treated." Tears began to flow down Charlotte's cheeks as the careful control Lady Victoria had instilled began to crack. "I don't know what to do anymore. I try so hard to remember all the rules and be perfect, but I always make mistakes. Lady Victoria says I'm not smart enough to be a proper princess, that I need her special lessons to fix what's wrong with me." "Charlotte, listen to me very carefully," Morrison said, fighting to keep his voice calm despite the rage building in his chest. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are intelligent, kind, and brave. What Lady Victoria is telling you is not true, and the way she's treating you is not acceptable." Charlotte looked up at him with a mixture of hope and terror. "But she knows so much about being royal. Everyone says she's the best governess in England. If I tell Papa what she really says and does, won't he think I'm just making excuses because I'm not good enough?" Morrison knelt down and took Charlotte's hands gently in his. "Your father served in the military, just like me. He understands the difference between tough training and cruelty. He would never want you to be afraid or hurt, no matter how important your education is. For the first time in months, Charlotte allowed herself to speak freely about her experiences with Lady Victoria. The details she shared confirmed Morrison's observations and revealed additional instances of emotional abuse that he had not witnessed. Lady Victoria had created an elaborate system of punishments and rewards designed to break down Charlotte's natural confidence and replace it with dependence on her approval. As Charlotte spoke, Morrison made mental notes of everything she revealed, knowing that her testimony would be crucial in supporting his formal report. But, more importantly, he focused on reassuring her that speaking up was not only acceptable but necessary, and that the adults in her life would protect her from further harm. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, ending when Mrs. Henderson discovered Charlotte's absence and came looking for her. Morrison promised Charlotte that he would speak to her father first thing in the morning and that changes would be made immediately to ensure her safety and well-being. As he watched Mrs. Henderson escort Charlotte back to her room, Morrison felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The truth was finally coming to light, but he knew the next few days would be challenging for everyone involved. Lady Victoria would not give up her position easily, and the royal family would need to address the situation carefully to avoid public scandal while protecting Charlotte's welfare. Morrison spent the remainder of the evening refining his report and preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important conversations of his career. Charlotte's courage in speaking up had provided him with the final pieces of evidence he needed to present a compelling case to Prince William. Tomorrow would bring answers, consequences, and, hopefully, the beginning of Charlotte's recovery from the psychological trauma she had endured.